Welcome to the Circle of Birth podcast. I'm your host and advocate, Ali Kranz. These podcasts are here to gather stories, people and information to better our understanding of the wisdom of birth and how we can reclaim our connections to birth from conception and beyond. You will hear stories not only from Australia but from all over the world, bringing together women, partners, midwives, doulas and all the people that have a birth story to share. So jump right in for this next Circle of Birth story. Welcome to the Circle of Birth, episode 31, and welcome to my croaky voice. I lost it somewhere and I'm trying to find it. So thank you for joining us. I'm very honoured to release this episode, part one of part two, with Robin Grille. This is our second podcast with a male, a father and a birth partner, and to boot, he's an author of two publications, Heart to Heart Parenting, Parenting for a Peaceful World. He's a psychologist and a parenting educator. So be sure to stay tuned for part two next week. And so Robin, in his life, he thought he was pretty aligned with the world and how things were working. And as he describes, until he became a father, he says, seeing your baby's head crowning, hearing that first sound from your baby's lungs, the power, beauty and vulnerability of that moment just reaches through your rib cages into your heart and takes it out. And that's where the conversation leads. We talk human history and birth, fathers with birth trauma of their own imprints, supporting fathers, supporting males, men, elders, and right down to his first experience of a birth, walking into his friend's house completely unaware that there was a baby boy in the room that night. This conversation will really, really have you engrossed into the depth of our human psyche around birth and the human body. It just leads into all sorts of beautiful places, and we did end up talking for 2 hours. So enjoy part one and stay tuned for part two. All right. Hi, Robin. Thank you so much. I am completely honoured that you have joined us for the Circle of Birth podcast. I really am waiting to hear your story, and you are the author of the book I have in my hand and some others. But the one I have in my hand that I'm getting into is called Heart to Heart Parenting. So our conversation will hopefully get into parenting, but you're here to share your personal journey, which I really appreciate.
Thank you, Ali. It's really great to be here with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's okay. So how do you feel about just starting off and becoming a bit of a storyteller for us and just telling us how you became into your birth journey as a dad, and then maybe branch into the work that you're doing, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm just thinking right now that there's so many entry points into that story. So it would, where do you think we should start in from, Ali? Where, in terms of what you're curious about and what you feel like your listeners would be most curious about, where's the entry point?
Okay. So how about the entry point of being just Robin and then entering into what life is going to be for you as a father and how that worked. And then I'd love to sort of hear about the birth journey too, in particular the labour and how that went, and then the feeling of becoming dad and what that means for you.
Okay. Well, I should tell you my daughter is about to turn 19. Her birthday is next month, so we're really going back in time here. We have to get in a time capsule, okay, and
let's go
and fly back. And it hasn't stopped being hard to believe, by the way, that this tiny little baby that we both once held in our hands is now a 19-year-old person, traveling around the world and doing the things that she does. It's an incomprehensible kind of an experience. And it makes me feel so much closer to every other parent to feel that, to look into that mystery and to be absolutely wowed. And to wonder, how did that happen? How did we get from little baby to this? I guess the first feeling for me is just the awe and the magnificence of it all, and just what a massive challenge the whole journey has been as a father.
Are you finding the ability to tap into that when you serve families in your line of work?
Yeah, all the time, because in case you didn't cover this earlier, I'm a psychologist, so as well as being a writer of parenting books, I'm a parent educator, and I do a lot of workshops around Australia, overseas as well, a number of different countries. Mostly for parents and for people that work with families and children, professionals. I have a private practice. I'm a psychologist in private practice, and most of my work is kind of family relationships work. I don't work with little kids, but I work with the parents. And, of course, that experience as a dad really changes my voice. It changes the way that I listen to parents. It changes, I think it's kind of grown my acceptance of what parents bring to me, because it is quite it's a fiery and intense and worrisome and difficult and exhilarating and chaotic sometimes journey. And it's, I feel grateful in a way, and I don't want to be glib about that because, sometimes it's not easy, but I feel grateful for the fact that the presence of my daughter has really, in some ways, really challenged me beyond what I thought was possible, and, pulled me apart and undone me like an old pair of shoelaces. When you feel often you feel out of control and vulnerable and worried, and one of the things that happens to us a lot as parents is that so many parents make a vow that I'm not going to sound like my dad did, I'm not going to sound like my mum did, and then when the journey of parenting pushes those buttons really big, we sound exactly like our parents. Well, I think that when we're under a great deal of stress, and we're trying to juggle, three things with two hands, we tend to fall back onto our automatic selves, which is right out of the playbook and the script of our own childhood and our own parents, and that happens to most people. And I think that parenting has humbled me increasingly and continues to do so more and more and more. It kind of makes judgment of other people extremely difficult. It's hard to be judgmental when it's so clear that I'm in the same boat. And guess what? The boat is rocking and it has a leak, right? So we're all in it together, and I kind of love that. I love this kind of shared humanity of it all, and I really think that parenting, having a child in your hands, is probably the greatest equalizer. It really is. I'll tell you what. I'll just say that I think it is it's the greatest equalizer. It's what makes us all the same across the world, even though we're all different and our children are different. At the core of it, we have the same struggles and the same yearnings. And when I take my workshops overseas, and I speak to migrant groups in Australia, even through an interpreter, and I meet many different cultures. We're also different on the surface, but when it comes down to the really core basic stuff around our kids, we're so the same. We're so the same.
Yeah.
The blood flows red for absolutely everybody. It just that kind of sameness and shared humanity gets so real for me when it comes to family and children at its most basic level. So
back when your daughter was about to be born, were you studying as a psychologist, or were you a practicing psychologist at that point? And
I had started not too long before that, and I hadn't stopped studying because I wanted to keep upgrading everything I was learning, but the study of psychology did not help me as a dad anywhere near as much as having my own therapy. I can tell you that made 90% of the difference. To subject myself to as much of my own personal growth journey, sometimes through one-on-one therapy, sometimes a group kind of work, and to look deeply into my own story as a child and as a baby, my own birth story, not just to look into it, but to feel into that body memory a little bit, okay, of having been born. And all of those things help more than absolutely anything else. Any book that I read or any study that I did at university. And I had done with a bunch of different therapies, I actually re-experienced some of the feeling of being born myself. Long before I ever thought I was ready to have a child.
Could you how did you even identify that that's what those feelings were? Or is it just because that you were intentionally pulling that out and that you could start to piece that together?
Well, in the late 80s and early 90s, when I was doing some of that kind of work for me, for my own personal growth journey, in Sydney, there was quite an abundance of the whole rebirthing movement, for better or for worse. Some of it was really good quality. Some of it was, not so good quality. But nevertheless, there was a really strong, really quite large subculture of people that were exploring that, and there was therapists from all over the world that were bringing their work to Australia, and I really delved into that. We all carry kind of issues, I suppose, from our childhood, adolescence, toddlerhood, primary school, etc. But some of the deepest wounds that we carry are from our time in the womb and our experience of childbirth ourselves when we were babies. Our first moment in the outside world, our first moment of physical separation from our mothers is so important and so such a powerful imprint. Our first smelling of the world. Some of the fears that we carry, or as well some of the love that we carry, harks back to that time. And that became quite clear to me when I was doing those kinds of therapies, and long before I went into a deep study of it. And it was powerful. I don't regret a moment of it. It was really, really powerful. For me, when I say that birth is important because of the impact that it has, I don't say that merely from some academic standpoint. For me, looking at the research, and there's a lot of research into that area now. There's a lot of research, and there's actually a website where it's all collected from professional peer-reviewed journals, where scientists look at correlations between your birth experience and some of the things that, the ways that you function in your life, mental health issues, all kinds of stuff. That came a little bit later. So I looked at that research a lot later. I began from the direct experience through the therapies that I was having. And it really brought home to me just how much of the, insecurities I had, the, some of these basic, deep, pre-verbal fears about being alive on this planet, how much of that was really dated back to the experience of being born and the time of being an infant, the perinatal time straight after being born. And I did, it took me years, much later I discovered through my reading how even though our heads don't remember what happened usually from before 2 or 3 years of age, our bodies remember everything. It's called implicit memory. Even now brain scientists have discovered where that's stored in the brain. So our bodies remember, even if we don't remember what happened, we remember how it felt. Okay. So there's a range of different body therapies or hypnotic kind of therapies that enable you to tap into that experience a little bit. And I did remember on a number of occasions aspects of how it felt to be born. And it was very, very powerful. I remember the terror and the panic. I also remember the ecstasy. It was quite literally an deeply ecstatic experience once I got out. Yeah.
So did you sit down with your birth mother and do this at the same time?
No, I was hesitant to talk directly to my mother, but about this. She had lots of kind of guilt issues, and that would have made it very, very difficult. I tried to talk to her a little bit. I mean, this is going back decades now. She told me some aspects of what it was like to give birth. I was born in Uruguay in South America, and the medical world had an absolute stranglehold on childbirth. It was absolutely, they'd convinced everybody that pregnancy is a kind of an illness, and it's a state of emergency, and you should be terrified, and you must go to a hospital and have all kinds of things injected into you, no matter what, whether you like it or not. And there was a sense of it's like a social trance that everybody believes because the experts are saying it. And if somebody has a white coat and speaks with a deep voice, you're entranced by that image and you just believe them. There was that general cultural induced state of terror, of shared collective terror about giving birth. Now, little wonder it was a traumatic experience for almost all mothers and fathers. I remember my father telling me that when my brother was born, he was extremely anxious, and he was, the old kind of stereotype of the father pacing up and down, smoking, when they used to let men smoke in the hospital.
In the smoking room, yeah.
Well, yeah. Which is a funny thing because my father didn't smoke, but he was terrified, and he heard through the door of the birthing torture chamber the screams of my mother when they did the episiotomy without anaesthetic, the blood curdling scream. And when the obstetrician came out, my father absolutely freaked out, and he picked him up by the scruff of the neck and lifted him off the ground, shoved him up against the wall, and screamed at him, what did you do to my wife? And, of course, the obstetrician said, "Sir, you have a beautiful baby boy. So relax." Of course, you can't see him because he will be immediately inserted into a plastic box and put in a room with a viewing window next to, a whole bunch of other babies in rows. Hopefully we'll put the right name tag on the right one. And that's how it went. And that's how my brother was born. That's how I was born, in similar circumstances in South America. And I have it on fairly good authority that it wasn't too different in most parts of the world. That state of emergency, hyper pharmaceuticalization of a natural process and a beautiful process, that has dominated most of humanity for a century. And it is, for me, that feels like a planetary tragedy. Terror that is unwarranted and unnecessary. Yeah.
It's really interesting telling you before when I was talking to Elena Tonetti and her story of her own birth in Russia, probably around the same era. The babies got taken away for 5 days as soon as they were born, born on metal like slabs of beds and all this sort of similar thing. And I remember asking her why, and she said because that's just the way they did it. And it seems like it was just a worldwide collective of this medicalised fear. And now we're at the filtration process, aren't we? Where it's sort of like some kind of capillary action that it's just stretched across the world, but now we're trying to feed it all back in again. It's a big job for humanity to.
I think
heal.
it is a massive. It's a case of self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, on the one hand, there's always going to be a small percentage of women, mothers giving birth, where there is a complication that genuinely warrants some kind of medical intervention. There's always going to be that percentage. And, I don't think that childbirth was always 150% perfect. There was maternal and infant death, even in the most utterly natural tribal societies. There was a small percentage of families that did happen for, where the mother and the baby died. So, there is a case for interventionism when it's really warranted. But that's a really tiny percentage. So the vast majority of interventionism is actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's an industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that has seized what should belong to women. It's seized it by the throat. And one of the things that I've understood, really, I'm very angry when I talk about this, Ali. I'm very angry about it and really, really upset about it because there's no good reason for it. When a mother is subjected to daily, repetitions of the idea that childbirth is going to be traumatic and insurmountably, excruciatingly painful, it's extremely unlikely for that not to be hypnotic, because we get those messages as fathers and mothers regularly on a daily basis, and you can look at any movie and television series or whatever, any story about childbirth and in the regular culture, and you're going to see somebody writhing who, for all intents and purposes, looks like they're undergoing some kind of horrible and hideous torture through the mere fact that a child is being born. Doesn't need to be that way. But when that message is given to mothers and fathers over and over and over again, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the human body expects a perilous situation, and that has an impact at the deepest, most visceral, musculoskeletal level. It's hormonally different when we're expecting a situation of fear and danger. You're different hormonally. There's more cortisol in the mix, etc. So that actually mitigates against the spontaneous, rhythmic, and healthy contractions. And in my practice, see, what's essential in childbirth is, a huge sensation of emotional safety. Mums and dads need to be surrounded by few people whom they have grown to trust deeply. And you can't trust somebody after a few sessions of meeting them in an office. That's where doulas are the greatest, I think, invention of modern times. They're not that modern, are they? They used to be doulas, but we got a new word for it, it seems, and it's become a profession. And later on, ask me please about. I think that we need doulas for the fathers as well.
Yeah, Well, that's one of the main sort of parts of a doula too, is to support the support person. If the father wants to be at the birth, then
I'd like one of each. I would like one of each, one especially for the dad, and I'll tell you why later. But I see this in my practice all of the time. I just totally lost count of the number of mothers that are speaking to me in my consulting room about their childbirth experience, and so many of them say, well, the contractions were coming along really naturally and really well. The moment that the obstetrician arrives in the room, bam, the contractions stop.
Yeah.
Because of the physical presence of the obstetrician. That's how deep, that's how trust affects the body, or lack of trust also affects the functioning of the body.
I was reading some old clippings, like I can't even think the era would have been late 1800s when obstetrics came through. Is that about right? Yeah, and there was descriptions.
Early 1900s is when somebody wrote a book. I can't remember his name right now, but somebody wrote a book that was the kind of the Kickstarter of modern obstetrics. And in that book he said, look, childbirth is a state of emergency and should always be intervened by medical doctors.
Yeah.
And it all took off from there. It was the best thing that happened to the industry.
Yeah. And that's when they started, I don't really want to talk about it, but they started pulling apart women and, quite taking them apart while pulling babies out and things like horrible things that they were doing. And I remember reading a clipping about they going to the houses of the birthing mother, and as soon as they walk in, they'd literally see the baby coming out and being sucked straight back in, and the lady would just stop completely. And they were journaling this then, but still having that huge control that they're not looking at it as like there's something in my presence that's causing this. It's more like, okay, then what instruments or what technology can we use to create this even more into something that I can control?
Well, yeah, and when that's right, something that male doctors can control. And I think there are some pretty good male obstetricians around that are incredibly sensitive and really, really love the women that they work with, and somehow they're naturals. I don't think they're in the majority, because I think fundamentally that it would have to be something a little bit miraculous about you to be able to help a woman give birth when you're never going to give birth yourself. And there's something so mysterious that only women can understand, and only women can understand it from the inside. As a man, I am utterly prepared to say that's not my province. That belongs to women. I know nothing there, not really, very little. And I really, really felt that because I was there for the birth of my daughter. I went very quiet. It was an intensely humbling experience, because I sat and I really felt how much, wow, this is so beyond me. And what I saw the women doing, the midwives, everybody, it left me speechless. And everybody seemed to kind of know intuitively something that would be forever completely out of my ken. Now that's amazing. To me, that's the experience of awe. I don't know this from the inside. I will never know this from the inside, and that's okay. That's how it should be. And, wow. Wow. Oh, my God, and wow. Just be on hand. And it's a really kind of, for me, that was a very powerful experience of dynamic passivity, in that I make no suggestions here. But I'm available for what is asked of me, and and I felt very included, and I felt very like I included myself in the whole experience. I also wanted to share with you, Ali, that it was personally quite healing to witness the birth of my daughter, because a lot of the programming really came back. I was frightened. I was very frightened. I thought, oh my God, this is where everything goes wrong. And to be fair, sometimes things do go wrong. And, I can say that I feel fortunate that in my family, it wasn't our turn for there to be, natural kind of complications. My daughter was born without complication. That doesn't mean it wasn't an incredibly demanding and intense experience. But
did you find those feelings heightened the more intense the labour progressed?
Yeah. There was times when I felt numb because the fear, the old program just really came rushing back.
Yeah. And did all the work that you did prior to that, did that help? Did you
Yes,
start
it
to
did.
tap into
Yes,
that?
it did. I'm very proud. I didn't pass out, did I?
Yeah.
If anyone needed, help me with this, I was totally physically available, and I was there, present enough to be able to know when I could feel the fear coming up. I understood my own kind of numbness as it came and went, and that was okay. It was really, really okay. I think if I hadn't gone through that therapy, it would have been harder for me. But there's a lot of things that really, really helped. It's the same as for me being in an aeroplane when there's really, really, really powerful turbulence. And I discovered when the turbulence really starts throwing a plane around, and I start to think, was this okay? Can the plane take it? If I look at the eyes of the cabin crew, and they got that totally kind of matter-of-fact, casual look, they might be sitting there filing their nails and waiting to be able to walk about the cabin again. That look of casualness really settles me straight away.
That's exactly what I had. A traumatic experience was in South America too, on a small plane. And I've always had, I don't know, it's just tapping back in every time I'm in a plane and it hits turbulence. Straight away I'll just go into panic until I watch the cabin crew all the time and their faces, and it's the same. Yep. Yeah, the same thing. I know they're trained just to hang out and be casual, but just knowing that, looking at them and going, it's okay because they're okay. And I can see that. It'd be the same with the midwife, as when you witness birth, the midwife's face. I've seen people, and especially fathers, look directly at the midwife's face the whole time.
You're looking at them for reassurance.
Yeah.
And they're not looking back at you because they're busy doing what they're doing. But I looked at. We had two midwives there. We were very fortunate. We had good people, and we looked at them, and they were looking like, this is so utterly normal. I've been here 1,000 times. It's just another day in the life of. And I found that deeply settling and quickly settling. And my daughter was born in a lounge room. And look, hang on. Let me come back to the lounge room. I wanted to say something else. I think fathers get unfairly talked down because we are uncomfortable at childbirth. I want to say that that's very unfair, because as if you wouldn't be uncomfortable at childbirth when so many dads, I think a large number, we've got our own kind of birth trauma that we survived. Add to that, it's not a very reassuring world. The whole world is telling you every day birth is an emergency, birth is a medical emergency, How do you think people, men as well as women, how do you think we're all going to feel when we get that kind of bullshit bloody hammered into our heads as we grow up? And we don't, birth is made secret. It's put in a bloody hospital. How the hell are you going to go in there and relax? So, this is a new story, because we went from having zero fathers attend the birth of their children to 90% in just a matter of years.
Yeah, and how did that happen?
It happened. It's a good thing. It's a really, really good thing. And when it goes well, it's just part of why that's good. There's so many reasons why it's good. It's beautiful what happens between mums and dads in, the incredible love that happens. And Mind you, everybody is getting really, really, really high on oxytocin.
Yeah.
Unless there are terrible things going on, then and even the fathers get a huge hit of oxytocin.
Yeah.
Even though they're not directly physically engaged in the birth process. So you go, it must be understood that you tend to, you go, it's actually an altered state. It's not like normal life. It's an altered state.
Mm.
It's a natural kind of a high. It's right. It's an extremely intensified experience. So it's a deeply bonding experience for the mothers and the fathers. But then what happens, you talk to most fathers that watched their child be born, and they get smitten. We get smitten. We just fall to our knees. And you're never the same person again. And, seeing the head of your baby crowning and being there to hear the first sound that comes from your baby's mouth and lungs. The power, the beauty, and the vulnerability of that moment, it just reaches through your rib cage into your heart and takes it out.
Wow.
And you're not going to be the same person again, and you are you're flooded with commitment and loyalty for your partner, for your baby. You're helpless to that. You're absolutely helpless to that. You could have the toughest hide, and your hide is absolutely undone. And even if you're not aware that just happened to you, it still happened to you anyway.
So could I just flip to your work for a second, and then I want to go back to the lounge.
Yeah.
Do you help, do you feel that a birth partner, particularly a male, with unresolved traumatic birth issues that are probably unbeknown to him, can bring that into a birth space and affect the outcome? If not...
Do you mean negatively?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. And that can happen. You can get a dad panicking in there.
Yeah.
Or you can get a dad, passing out on the floor, and then suddenly it becomes about him, I worry that dads get blamed for that. So we can't just expect dads to 90% of dads just suddenly from one generation to the next go in there. You can't expect that you attend a few birthing classes where you learn how to hold your partner while she breathes. They get thrown into the place. And for some dads, that goes extremely well. But if you're carrying a lot of your own birth trauma, and if you haven't had a little bit of a healing and a supportive process around that, don't blame the dads when they come apart.
Yeah.
Trauma is trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm telling you right now, birth trauma is no different than the trauma carried by a war veteran. Well, actually, it's worse because as a baby, you're far more unable to, there's no fight or flight as a baby when as a small baby being born. There's no fight or flight. So in one sense, it conditions your nervous system more powerfully than war trauma. So this is not fun and games. You've got to take it seriously. So,
and
look,
do you, in your work, help a lot of couples before their birth journey?
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I love to do. I wish I had more invitations to do that. I don't get enough. People don't tend to go to see a psychologist preemptively. I wish they did. They tend to wait up until things are really, really awful, after bad stuff has happened, and then they come along then. I wish everybody could work with a counsellor of some kind preemptively before birth comes.
Yeah.
Just to talk about your own birth story, your own feelings about your own mum and your own dad, and to go into the depths of that, the good, the bad, and the ugly, just to know your own truth. It is so empowering to know your own truth. I mean, your emotional truth, the road that you have traveled.
Yeah.
It brings you into your body. You don't have to make it okay. You just need to kind of tell the truth in the presence of somebody that cares about you. And that's empowering, right? And I just quickly want to say, Ali, that you don't necessarily have to go back and do what I did and remember your birth. And it doesn't have to be – there are different options available. You don't have to necessarily – it was useful for me, but there's other things to do. Even it would be very, very helpful for dads as well as for mums to for instance, to watch a lot of imagery of normal childbirth and the beauty of it, the ecstasy of it. Movies like, have you heard of Orgasmic Birth?
Yes. Put that in the references too, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, that's not that the name of that movie is not a metaphor.
Yeah.
It's literal.
Yeah.
I've spoken to enough mothers who'll tell me, look, the experience of childbirth was orgasmic. It felt physically very, very similar to an extremely powerful orgasm. Mm. There was some pain involved as well, but it was also right. It's awful how things like that are kept secret. Mm. In terms of what's possible when both mums and dads are, when you give a mum and dad the work that they need to be able to be released from fear, because that's the fear of our ancestors, it's not ours.
Yeah.
And you can't just flick a switch and tell yourself stop being frightened. That doesn't help. Mm. There's a little bit of a process and a bit of a journey where you can naturally, when human beings stop being frightened, when you show them a good reason to expect wellness, something concrete that they can trust. Mm. And then the world isn't frightening anymore. Mm. Okay? And we need to do that for each other.
Yeah. It's that I'm just kind of trying to feel into that and think of it like that intergenerational shame that we carry through, our shame as a child, and bring that into our lives. And I feel too it's so complex. We're just so crowded by choice and information, and it's so quick. And I feel something like, I was just thinking of that orgasmic birth and that full letting go in that birth experience. Like, I all out to people that can achieve that. I think that's incredible, because it's just a sexual event, and it's so close to the orgasm of a woman when, the birth. And, they've even studied it, the nitrogen explosion when the sperm hits the egg and all this sort of wonderful stuff. Mm-hmm. Yet I feel too like the label is so complex to carry through. Like, going, I had an orgasmic birth means that you are so far into something else that you must be this type of person, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is what you mean, Ali. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have spoken to mothers that thought that they were crazy because no one had told them of that experience. No one had prepared them for it. And they thought that feeling, that deep state of bliss meant that they were insane, and they couldn't speak about it for years.
Is that because of our shame? Because we were growing up as kids, private parts and this and that, and not to understand our body and honour it.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, and the kind of it's shame of the body, shame of the genitals and the hips, but shame of the animalistic sounds that your body wants to make.
Yeah.
And the animalistic kind of aggressive movements that your body spontaneously wants to make, the involuntary movements that are that facilitate childbirth.
Yeah.
Right, without medical intervention of any kind, So, centuries and centuries and centuries an extremely toxic shame. I mean, a hatred of women. And I've actually read a lot of anthropological studies into the story of the bashing of women's sexuality through the ages in most of the world's cultures, the big civilizations. Absolute loathing of the freedom and the capacity for women to be sexual and animalistic beings. We're all more than that, but that's for men and women, the animalism, the sexuality. It's a fundamental aspect of our embodied life, and that has been butchered relentlessly by not just the church, even before the church, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans. The history of that is long and appalling, and that's precisely implicated in what gets in the way of the naturalness of birth. When your body wants, that you're grown, that you roar, and that you move rhythmically in the way that your body wants to move, and lying down passively, for the convenience of the hospital staff, is the perfect enemy of that process. With the legs up in the air, completely out of control, with the feet not grounded so that you can support your movement as it wants to happen, the rocking, right? I just really fear for the future of humanity unless midwives can come back and women, seize control over childbirth again for the sake of the entire species. Or I think in some ways we're doomed.
It's a huge history, isn't it? It's a huge history of...
When you see the size of it, it really gets you. That's the way that birth is being done is probably one of the last bastions of misogyny. And that doesn't just affect women; it affects all of us.
Yeah.
And I think part of what really brings that reality home is when you're finally exposed to what natural childbirth looks like. The sheer beauty of it, and I always feel funny talking about childbirth as a man because it's not something that, I'm not directly in it, am I?
Yeah, but I was just thinking of you, right? So say you back in 1799, and I was just thinking of the lounge room, and you as a male then being able to witness the birth of your daughter, and imagine if you and all the other males had that sense of awe and completely resonated with that feeling and carried that through into our history and what we are now, things would be so much different. And it would just be beautiful. I mean, this is a much longer story, but centrally the patriarchal thing is actually a reaction to it's a symptom. It's a societal symptom. It's been a kind of reaction to extreme survival stress that epigenetically changed the behavior of societies over several generations, and that heavily patriarchal societies are always a lot more violent. It's a sliding scale. The more patriarchal it is, the more violent it is. Yeah. So in terms
that's just an anthropological fact, and entirely verifiable fact. And it begins from gestation, childbirth, and early bonding. It doesn't stop there, but it begins there. And the amount of science now, if you don't want to believe people's, therapy story, the amount of science that there is now, pretty powerfully demonstrating a link between your childbirth experience, and if there's no healing somewhere along the line, all kinds of behavioural issues as well as health issues later in life. I mean, it's one of the most powerful formative moments of life. Doesn't mean that things, you could be somebody that had a very traumatic birth, and then there's all kinds of healing that's available to you later. It doesn't mean that, the book ends there. But Jesus, you want prevention rather than cure.
Yeah.
If you could help it for our own children and grandchildren, prevention rather than cure. More than just prevention. It's not just about avoiding problems, but I recently spoke at a conference called Healthy Birth, Healthy Earth in Scotland. And it's because people realize, conferences of that nature is because people realize that we can really transform the way human society operates, most powerfully by transforming the way that we do childbirth collectively, which means looking after mothers in a completely different way, but also looking after fathers. And, if I had my wish list happen, I would like to see fathers also go through. You'd need to, want to do it, but at least to have this available, that you go through like a counselling process where you get to talk through your feelings about the childbirth that is coming, and to have somebody you can trust to talk about your fears, your hopes, your dreams, a little bit about your own story, and to be exposed as a father to, the truth, really.
Yeah.
Of the naturalness of this thing.
Wouldn't that be great at your fifth midwife appointment, and it's all about the father, where the midwife just looks at him and goes, right, let's see what we can do for you, and have that as part of the program, a counselling session.
I really think so. I think dads need to hear from the midwife, because they are the flight crew that lets us know that the turbulence is fine.
Yeah.
We've been through it a million times. And I think additionally to that, it helps to hear from elder males of what it's like to be in that role. And
that's another story for us, isn't it?
Where
are our elder males?
Well, this is a generation where there's a large number of men that have, done some intentional healing around their birth story, and where it's the first generation in a long time that men attended the birth of their children. So elders are coming into eldership, a generation of us. What an asset, what a treasure house. Younger men that are about to have their first baby, hear from us, tell us, your feelings, your excitement, your fears, if you have them. And ask candid questions. If you think things are yucky, say so. Yeah. Bring it all out. This is it's exactly what childbirth is like. By the way, don't think for a moment that the only person being born is your baby.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Fathers are born, mothers are born.
Yeah.
In those few hours.
This is a great tip for doulas or midwives, actually. I know in myself, through my experiences, to when you're sitting with a couple, to even get the father's own birth stories, or maybe he's got other children, and to really resonate with that and offer them a chance to find an avenue for counselling or support.
Yeah, for sure. It makes such a difference.
Yeah.
And I did have older friends that had been through it all, and that did help me, just hearing their stories. Actually, just quickly, I'll tell you a funny story that when I was quite a bit younger, years before my daughter was even an idea in our minds, I accidentally walked in on my friend's birth of his daughter.
How did you do that?
Well, that bears explaining, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He and I were playing music. We were a folky kind of duo, both sing and play guitar. And we were busy. We used to get lots and lots and lots of gigs in pubs around Sydney. And I used to go to his place in Coogee or was it Clovelly, in the eastern suburbs in Sydney. I used to go there for practice. And he neglected to tell me that his wife went into labour. And I can't blame him for that. I mean, things are, quite intense, and there's other things to think about. So I happily rocked up as usual, guitar in hand, and a knock on the door, and there was no answer, so I just let myself in because he's a trusted friend. I just walked in, and suddenly there they were before me with their midwife. They had his wife was in the birthing pool, and their house was looking out over the ocean. This wonderful, rundown old apartment looking out over a cliff over the ocean, and the dolphins came. There were dolphins jumping. Oh. You'd see them down among the waves, the swells. And I was just dumbfounded. This is nothing like what I expected to walk in, and there we are. And they both looked at me and said, "We forgot to tell you, the baby's coming. Whoops. Look, it's okay if you stay for a little while, but then please don't stay too long and let yourself out." Right?
We're going to back out the door.
I stood there feeling extremely foolish, but unable to move towards them or away from them, and unable to speak, just standing there like a lump, holding my guitar case in one hand. And I was just so moved by just awed by the experience. I said goodbye to them. Of course they were in their bubble of focus, and I tiptoed out soon afterwards, and I sat in their lounge room upstairs quietly for about half an hour because I was so deeply kind of grabbed by the power of the energy in that room. It's kind of like it's something so much larger than our usual life. Incredibly majestic. And I could tell that my brain couldn't understand or comprehend. It was really very powerful and very peaceful. And then I let myself out. And their beautiful little girl was breech born, bum first, with no medical intervention at all. Cool. I think now she's about 22 years old.
Wow.
She came out bum first.
Yeah.
And, my mate was having a laugh with me about how because she came out bum first, her legs kept on they wouldn't fold downwards. He would bring her legs back down after she was born and they just bounced back up.
Really?
Like they were spring-loaded. But she's just a gorgeous young woman. I think she must be maybe 24, 25.
It's really interesting with the dolphins. I know, again, I'll bring in Alina into it when I was talking to her in Russia when she set up the birth camps and the dolphins flocked for each birth. And she said over there dolphins were just fish, like they didn't really have any connection to them as being majestical creatures. They were just normal fish. But then they made these correlations with dolphins and women in labour. And I'm wondering if the noises that women make, maybe I'm just thinking of your friend's story there, like resonate somehow, the vibration or something must trigger them. It's really interesting.
And it goes back to, Ali, what we have done to childbirth is one of the greatest wounds to our capacity to feel the interconnectedness with other non-human beings, our essential interconnectedness with biological life beyond humans. We have, I think, disability, a collective disability in that area.
Yeah.
A neurological disability where we're blind to that and we build violent societies, consumer, desperate greed societies, exploitative societies as a result of living in this illusion that we're disconnected and separate from our non-human family. So there's so much about interconnectedness and these subtle communication energies that are shared across the species, that we live stupidly as if that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's
And
really sad, isn't it?
it's a state of energetic retardation, and collective birth trauma has quite a bit to do with that. It's no accident that we tend to relate to the earth as our mother. And when we got ripped out of our mother most violently at our own childbirth, as if that's not going to have some kind of an impact, if not for everybody, but for a lot of people, in how we feel into our relatedness, our interdependency with the rest of biological life. So there's nothing, hippie or there's no fairy tale involved in the fact that, of course, dolphins came.
Yeah.
And the more science gets into those realms of understanding, very explainable communicational energies that, electromagnetic EMR, and sounds that have an impact across the species.
Yeah.
The more that science digs into those realms, the more it becomes like, well, that's not more bizarre than the fact that you and I are talking over Skype.
Yeah.
If we told somebody that from 50 years ago, you'd be probably put in an asylum.
And it ends. Where are we going to go to from here? And there's another 50 minutes of just all of this goodness to come in part 2. So please stay tuned.
Did you connect with this episode? Then head over to our website, circleofbirth.com. There you'll find show notes, pictures, resources, and potentially connect with today's storyteller. Don't forget to sign up to be updated with new empowering episodes and content. Help the show grow by contributing a tip in the jar to make sure we can continue to better the podcast and connect more and more to the wisdom of birth and each other. Hey, and don't forget the iTunes rating. This has been another episode of the Birth Share Project. We breathe, we birth, we empower.